Alrighty. Limbus is a turn-based RPG where you lead 12 sinners to venture into the buried facilities of Lobotomy Corporation and lay claim on the Golden Bows. While this is paraphrasing their tagline on Steam, this is the kind of impression that Project Moon wants you to have. They go on to call it a combination of turn-based RPG and real-time brawl, which, let's be real, it isn't. They state that each turn results in displays of exhilarating action, both sides acting simultaneously, and in the scramble, characters targeting each other may clash. The outcome of which depends on the strength of skills used and a sprinkle of luck. The winner can shut down the loser's skill. Please tell that to whomever designed Unbreakable Coins the way they did. Anyway, the takeaway is to ensure you use the right skills to win clashes. This frames Limbus as a strategic affair. Plan for the chaos and let your informed decisions carry you through the encounters. Unfortunately, this then comes to odds with the next part of their marketing here: single-handed skirmishing. Everything needs to be mobile friendly, using simple and practical controls. We can't nest too many things into menus. Everything should be straightforward enough and easy to read. This part 100% bites them in the arse due to their ambitions with their combat system. It also finds a way to move us from strategy to tactics rather quickly, as I'll cover later. Next is the typical gacha sales pitch. Use a variety of IDs and egos to form powerful synergies to overcome tricky challenges, and tailor your teams to each encounter. Learn their behavior and weaknesses, and compose the right team to eventually conquer them. This one hurts to read. Knowing the game is gacha and new players are going to be in for hell while their accounts are still underdeveloped when they hit certain content face first. Let's also be real here. A good chunk of the player base gravitates towards the meta and often enjoys slamming square pegs into circle holes rather than reading into boss design or ways to counteract encounters in a more planned manner. The last thing they want you to know about is that Limbus takes place in Project Moon's established world of the city, coming after Lobotomy Corporation and Library of Ruina. This part is most of what people rave on about, that the story is peak and that you should play Limbus for the Cantos if nothing else. Unfortunately, Kanto playtime makes up a small portion of interaction with this gacha game, as there's plenty of other gameplay related contents that the devs should have you engage with. Be it Luxcavations, mirror dungeons, railways, or events, there's a good heft of game to go around. All of them, however, engage with the same central mechanics in the combat. So I've poked holes in their Steam page. So what? Does any of it actually translate into the game itself? Well, quite a lot, yes. As much as I'd like to market the game as a mobile-friendly turn-based RPG with intuitive controls, the underlying encounter design that favors planning over improvisation is at odds with itself. While they want to give off the feeling of directing your sinners to overcome the odds, the game is marred by quite a lot of luck and RNG-based elements that make planning very difficult to make consistent. A lot of these elements take the decision-making out of players' hands and can lead to frustrating moments of futility, especially in the more difficult content, where it may not necessarily be your fault that your sinners rolled low on speed, or missed a coin in a clash, or even had a poor starting lineup in their skill buckets. While more modern parts of ID design philosophy seek to address it, they do so in a very band-aid solution-like manner, which can be rather unhealthy in its own way. Anyhow, there's a lot of frustrating luck-based elements that cause players to hit walls, or continuously resets for the best outcome possible. This breaks the pacing of the story hard and forms a rather toxic relationship between success and failure based on elements beyond the player's control. This isn't the most healthy for the game, but with the philosophy of the latest season in terms of ID and encounter design, there's some hope at the end of the tunnel in finding ways to dig themselves out of the hole they've dug themselves. For this video, I'd like to specifically address speed, and how with a few adjustments, we can create quite a healthy sandbox to design around before we tackle everything else the game has to offer. Now, speed in most turn-based games is touted as one of the most important stats available. It fills ATB bars faster, allows characters to act more often, even act several times before the enemy can even mount a counter-offensive. It's one of the most difficult things to balance, and with Limbus, it's no different. In Limbus Company, speed dictates the order of actions and whether or not a sinner can clash or intercept their foes in combat. At the start of every turn, it rolls based on a range unique to every ID for base speed before factoring in haste and bind respectively to add and subtract from the sinner's final speed count. This final speed is then laid out on the dashboard in order of fastest to slowest, left to right. With the single-handed skirmishing system, you then just drag your finger or cursor across the board to select what skills each sinner will use, before finally dragging the chain to the resolution area, or hitting enter to start the combat phase. In an unfocused encounter, speed matters significantly less, as everyone is bound to clash something unless there's more skills on one side than the other. However, focused encounters, this is completely different, as speed plays a more major factor. As it is focused encounters where this speed range can completely change your approach to combat, this is where I'd like to design around the most, at least in terms of proposed changes, possible fixes, and adjustments to Limbus's gameplay. Focused encounters also tend to be the more narratively important and difficult ones, meaning this is a solid place to stress test things as well. First though, we need to properly outline some concepts and goals, the main ones following a game design framework proposed by LeBlanc, known as the Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics model, or MDA for short. Mechanics outline the rules of the game, the pieces required, the environment in which it is played, and options presented to the players. This is where a vast majority of game design is done. Designers tweak mechanics in order to make players interact with their game in specific ways. In curtailing Limbus's speed issues, we would need to look at how speed can be adjusted and what rules govern its implementation. From there, in what ways players currently have direct control over the mechanic and how they can manipulate it in their favor or otherwise. Regarding dynamics, these outline play pattern, how players interact with the game given the set of rules and options provided to them. In the case of Limbus, it is often hitting the win rate button and adjusting clashes to be more favorable, or doling skills out to clash as many attacks as possible, in as favorable a way their team is able. This reduces incoming damage significantly, while also ensuring the highest chance of dealing favorable amount of damage back. Any damage dealt to your sinners in Limbus can be seen as potentially fatal due to how high some of the newer stuff can roll, as well as the way the stagger mechanic works. Thanks to unbreakable coins, there's also chip damage to account for as well, some of which was a tad overtuned when first unveiled. This caused a rather big uproar in the player base due to their original way of playing being significantly disrupted. Conflicting accounts and strategies to deal with these types of attacks only muddied the waters, as you were either in Camp Clash or Camp Evade when it came to unbreakables. Regardless, for the sake of our argument here, we're going to isolate how players utilize speed. Well, that's the thing. In most cases, they have no real control over speed, since it does just roll and move sinners around the dashboard. If a sinner has the same speed as another, one in earlier deployments is prioritized to go first. Now, since players can't influence speed directly outside of hitting the Durante button, they instead have to play with the hand they're dealt. This often means finding which sinners can't intervene in clashes and having them only clash attacks meant for them, and having faster sinners intervene to take clashes others may not have the open skill slots or speed to do so. Another factor of speed is the application of debuffs and their expiration timing. Since a lot of stronger debuffs expire at the end of turn, sinners can only get use out of them if they are slower than the one applying the debuffs. Unfortunately, in many cases, they are faster due to the stronger debuffs being restricted to slower and older IDs, with Project Moon moving away from specific status effects. Stuff like Paralysis, Fragile, and Offense Level Down are significantly harder to come by in modern ID designs, likely due to their oppressive strength. The ultimate culmination of this degeneracy is Malforced and her ridiculous speed capabilities. I kind of lied earlier when I said players had no real control outside of Durante. Some IDs can get haste and fix themselves to significantly higher speed than many others. The Mao branch of haste shows is just that, since their on-demand counters allow them to get Strider Mao, that converts into a stupid amount of haste, in which turn buffs up their speed dramatically, and all but fixes themselves to the left side of the dashboard as the fastest IDs. Malforced in addition also provides assist defense, which lets a significantly slower ID, who may not be able to clash, be given a layer of defense in the form of Malforced clashing on their behalf. This single ID is a stupid exception band-aid fix for Limbus's speed issues. It can always clash, and can always clash on someone's behalf, making speed just a non-factor for this ID to begin with. The rest of the Maos aren't quite as oppressive as this in terms of speed utility, but they do end up falling into the "we're the damn fastest" category. Eliminating the concept of speed is not fixing any issues with the rest of the team, who are subject to the whims of Limbus's speed rolls. Malforced can also just get screwed over by a low speed roll, but the close to perfect ability to ignore its existence isn't healthy for the game, especially when you have people slotting her in unintended places just for the fact she's Everlasting's best user and it isn't even bloody close. I really wish it was. Last to cover in LeBlanc's MDA model is aesthetics. This is the feeling and experience a player gets out of a title. In Limbus's case, if we go by the marketing, it's to lead your sinners to overcome the odds, be their manager and director through the adversities thrown at them. We're kind of there, I guess. In terms of narrative and general guidance, the state of Limbus more or less accounts for this feeling. We're forced to improvise and adapt to ever-changing scenarios, facing the sin and saving the ego. All that jazz. Speed sucks when it comes to this, since it takes a lot of the decision-making out of our hands and adds an element of futility when it's no longer going our way. Yeah, it's more oppressive than you may initially think. Why do you figure that we have a Durante button that lets us halve the enemy's speed at the push of a button? While this wrangles us back some semblance of control, it ain't for particularly long either. The luck-based nature of speed ranges does not constitute greatly to any kind of strategic or tactical planning, and can potentially be the one thing that absolutely screws over an encounter just for being a little unlucky. Let's see what we can do to fix that, shall we? Let's look at the current speed manipulation tools that we have and what they can and can't do. Haste adds a level of consistency to speed rolls. It's a final addition onto an ID's speed post-roll that allows them to more often reach the front of the dashboard. In greater amounts like the Mao branch, they can pretty much fix themselves there. Consistency is good in this case, since they'll now be open to picking which clashes they can afford to take. Haste is thus a rather powerful status that lets players do some level of speed manipulation on a per ID basis. However, not every ID has access to it, nor does every sinner necessarily have an easy way to access it outside of their kits. Bind is the negative version of haste. There's a few ways of applying it to self, so making a sinner slow on purpose is harder, but it's more easily applicable to enemies. On single targets, it can be very potent in allowing all of your sinners to take clashes on their own terms, but since it is a debuff, without ways of applying it to several targets at once, its impact is lessened when there are multiple enemies to take account of. Finally, we have the Durante button, specifically Pulgritia. This lets us once per day halve the speed of all enemies. Typically, this is enough to then be able to slot in clashes as we see fit and ignore the disparity in speed for a turn. As for whether or not we'd be able to ignore it on future turns, that all depends on whether we can get enough haste or bind, or if we're going to be shit out of luck and watch the enemy roll high again. Mind you, Chains of Others does kind of fix this particular issue, but it is the reason Merceau is, Merceau's egos are hell for a reason. Anyway, past the above interactions and speed manipulations, as players we have no further influence on speed. This leads to one specific awkward situation: status timing and sequencing. Due to the random nature of speed rolls, we cannot guarantee an order in which our sinners will act. While we can mix IDs that fix themselves to the front or IDs that potentially roll lower, manipulating speed through haste and bind is often not enough to then sequence skills and attacks as we see fit. This is rather unfortunate, as there are some synergies and effects that require specific statuses or debuffs to fully make use of, especially since quite a few expire at the end of turn. They go completely and totally wasted on units with low speed. This is stuff like Garden of Thorns, Electric Screaming, Everlasting, Offense/Defense level down application, Fragile, Damage up, Paralysis, Amplitude conversion, etc. There's many more that when applied at the end of turn are just completely and totally useless. Many synergies thus die on the back of speed rolls. The frustration here comes from the fact that we can't reduce the amount of speed or properly time when an ID is supposed to act. We do not have strong enough capabilities in terms of sequencing. If we were able to manage the sequence with more control, many more synergies would come to life, and a lot of old IDs and egos would have some use even to this day. But as it stands, many cool ideas are just dead in the water, and anything that wishes to be more relevant either needs to roll higher on speed or have ways of manipulating it. While it's not all that crazy oppressive or anything like that, it does call into question why the sinners couldn't just coordinate a little more under manager's instructions and allow for some more team play. The sinners are no longer just a disorganized mob of barely functional fighting force, and with the manager's guidance, should be capable of so much more when working in tandem, right? The proposed change I'd like to make to mechanics would thus incorporate this idea and encourage players to have a further hand in speed manipulation. This would be giving the capability of sequencing back to the players and thus allowing them to explore synergies that would not have otherwise been possible. All this while attempting to preserve the current fantasy of a lot of units may seem rather difficult, but I figure I've got an interesting enough fix to employ here that should satisfy even Project Moon's scatterbrained Steam store page ideas. This would be the implementation of speed brackets. Rather than rolling an absolute number for speed, I would be proposing the rolling of a maximum. That of which, taking that number rolled, but allowing a sinner to act at lower speeds as required. This means if a sinner rolls a 7 on their speed, they could act anywhere between 1 and 7 speed if the manager wanted them to do so. As for how to implement this in a practical and intuitive way for single finger touch controls, I reckon we can use the dashboard to manipulate this in a rather clever way. Clicking on portraits once swaps the lower skill into a defense skill. Clicking and holding opens up the available egos. What if clicking and dragging to the right allowed you to reposition sinners within their speed brackets, with the distance moved lowering the speed by an amount moved? Now, we're still within the philosophy governed by Project Moon's sales pitch, but now we've unlocked a ridiculous amount of tactical depth. Now, if a buff or debuff is super important, we can have them be the first to go at all times, followed by everyone else. This doesn't lessen the importance of high speed or binds application at all, but rather generates more interesting characters with lower speed by allowing the rest of the team to accommodate for them. Of course, we can still keep all of the speed-based conditionals, the Heishos can still have their fun and reuse coins based on high speed, but we would still be opening the doors for plenty of options in terms of sequencing synergies and allowing older stuff to be more relevant again. Any passive that clings onto an ally with the highest or lowest speed becomes selective, rather than particularly random to boot. We can guarantee someone being slow or someone being at the fastest end, giving us more control in that regard too. Even for the status enjoyers out there, if you need to sequence sinners a specific way to levy counter application, you could do so as well in a more controlled manner. This makes more troublesome to maintain statuses like sinking or rupture infinitely more stable, when you can sequence who is applying and burning it. You can amp up the effects of debuffs like fragile to let the entire team take advantage of it. Heck, even outside of clashing, when an opponent is staggered, you can coordinate combos a lot more effectively. These are some wild capabilities that are unlocked by allowing us to reduce speed on purpose. Regarding other notable synergies, any team leaders who rely on dashboard position can adjust themselves to work directly with their subordinates. As for the biggest problematic buff we'd be providing here, Resonance gets a huge buff. Being able to move those with similar sins around on the dashboard to match up means an extremely high amount of absolute resonance going out. To accommodate, we'd have to nerf the power of resonance or design around teams having it more often than not. On the flip side, adding ways to more consistently achieve resonance means we can go higher on the benefits from kits. Well, rather their inclusion in kits. Captain Ishmael would be very, very proud. Of course, it's not all upsides by giving players the ability to effectively dictate their own rotations. One of the worst possible things for a live service game to have is repetitiveness. This will cause player interest to drop like a rock unless the meta manages to keep shifting. However, since a lot of old IDs would suddenly receive a huge buff from this change, we'd effectively be jailing ourselves into rotation hell until such a time where a stronger ID is able to apply as effective debuffs or buffs for the team. This kind of repetitiveness is what kills a lot of games with perfect consistency and not enough content to challenge that consistency. Outside of MD Extreme, implementing this change would fundamentally break the fucking game wide open. At least at first, before slowly melding into rotation hell, wherein the same strategies would just get looped again and again and again ad nauseum. Once players are tired of such consistency, they would then just move on to brighter and greener pastures, dropping the game and thus eventually losing the company money. What initially seems like a really good idea is in the end potentially bad for their bottom line. That is, unless they manage to get more creative with the contents and adapt to this particular change. That would also cost a fair bit of dosh that may not be ideal either. I would argue that things have already hit a level of repetitiveness though. How many times have you hit the win rate button while playing recently? It's a nice tool and all, but it's too useful to be able to functionally autoplay or brain off the game. This one I reckon is more of a consequence of the gacha side of things, where the content progression can be a rather maddening endeavor. Yes, I'm staring at Luxcavation MD specifically, but tackling those would be an entirely different video. Win rating under this speed change can stay. It'd likely be less efficient since they're not setting up as many synergies as manual play, but if you just want to win clashes without thinking and play at like 60% efficiency without needing to think, I'd reckon it's fine. Heck, imagine if you could just adjust the speed brackets, then hit the win rate button after. Now we get the best of both worlds to an extent. Of course, people will eventually scream for an auto speed bracket adjuster and a completely automated system too. Anyway, what has Project Moon come up with instead, and is it enough? Well, past the Hey Show speed band-aid, they've done a few things for encounters. First off is giving specific boss skills the ability to be clashed regardless of speed. This particular change is most notable when looking at bosses like Lei Heng. His big attacks are all clashable by anyone, so even a dork with 1 speed can clash Savage Tangle Cleaver. This makes it so the party can be more selective on clashing essentials. On the other hand, there's also clashable guards and counters done by bosses. If a Sinner was looking to attack unopposed into a target with those slotted, they're forced to clash into those instead, giving them something to clash regardless. Lei Heng is one, and the final boss of the counter slots them in too. The unfortunate thing with both of these is in making counters last significantly longer. In Lei Heng's case, not being able to properly unoppose him means less damage getting through quite as easily. For the final boss of the counter though, it's particularly bad since up to 2 defenses can be slotted with some unbreakables if memory serves right. Regardless, these are some steps taken in the right and wrong directions. Aside from encounter design, we can look at some other kits that have been released more recently. There have been more with speed manipulation capabilities. Of note are Night Owl's Gregor, who can inflict bind for his unique status, while gaining haste inside of the same kit. The same can be said with Sinking Dawn, who has ways of gaining haste just by playing to her kit's strength. This mirrors the scaling in Ruiner, wherein higher end key pages have more speed dice, at least in the theming that higher powered characters can manipulate their speed better. Perhaps one day we'll get a character that rolls twice and picks the higher or lower number of speed. There's design space that's yet to be explored. Anyhow, PM is gradually working in ways for us to take more control of speed, but it does little to no favors for our older IDs. While we can eventually expect newer stuff to have layers of consistency, I doubt we'll be getting anything close to what I propose. To wrap things up, let me run the proposed change through the MDA model. In mechanics, we'd be adding a swipe feature that lets players adjust the placement of their IDs on the dashboard by lowering their speed intentionally. That's actually all that mechanically changes. As a result in dynamics, players would build more often around on-turn synergies rather than strictly persistent status effects. Since older IDs have some of the more powerful on-turn related effects, those would see a surge in favorability, as would any ID that can apply strong single-turn buffs and debuffs. From there, players wouldn't be looking for IDs with the highest speed, but rather IDs with enough speed to clear encounters and design their team synergies around. Team leaders and Sin resonance would increase in value as well. Even being able to edge out smaller resons would make for a considerable advantage. As a result, some rotations may become rather stale and repetitive without more complex encounter design that can throw a wrench in managers' plans. Unfortunately, players may get real bored if they're always doing the same thing over and over again, especially if it has no automation. Finally, when regarding aesthetics, it paints the experience of a manager more competently managing their sinners. It paints the experience of a manager more competently managing their sinners, having them build some proper teamwork rather than their more fuck it we ball approach to combat. It's a natural evolution for the sinners as they begin trusting each other more. All of that is unlikely to ever happen. PM's code is already too spaghetti, and throwing in what seems like a simple but deeply impactful change may irreversibly fuck up their entire game. I hope you enjoyed a bit of game design theory crafting. If you'd like me to go more in depth on speed, I could break down a few IDs under this paradigm and the consequences of it in more detail. Heck, we could figure how bosses would need to change in order to accommodate. Otherwise, let me know what parts of Limbus you'd like me to break down and propose solutions for. Once again, thanks for watching and listening. Don't know how this one will be received, but it's a decent change of pace from covering IDs. Next will likely be the last standalone ID video for a while, Lord Hongers. If I'm unlucky, that video might be 2 times longer than this one. Regardless, if you'd like to see more content like this, drop a subscription below. Again, thanks for watching.